In this video, we're going to take a look at what submission means in the word with regard to wives submitting to your husbands in particular. By the way, the word says husbands also submit to your wives, but I want to take a look at wives submitting to their husbands because that's the one that's always being manipulated, while the other is always being left out. Now, when I was baptized into a counterfeit church in my 30s in graduate school, there was someone in my cohort who was married to a pastor, and they just wanted me to get baptized in their counterfeit church so bad. This man teaches his family that it is okay, that it's good, cute, to dress up his little children and take them trick-or-treating on Halloween. He teaches his family that Christmas is a holy day, a day in which they are celebrating Christ's birthday. He teaches his family that there's a pre-tribulation rapture coming. And anybody who believes that does not know that we have a covenant. They do not understand what it means to have a covenant, because what they fundamentally believe is that God is going to come and pick you up before you have to endure anything, and that is a lie. So for all intents and purposes, this man is leading his family all the way to hell. And I've seen this a million times. I've seen it with pastors' wives, quintessential pastors' wives, who just submit to whatever their husband says. They act like they have no responsibility to discern anything. Their husband is their God. The word says, submit to your husband as unto the Lord. It doesn't say that your husband is the Lord. You have to use the brain God gave you. You got to use the sense that God gave you. And you got to go back to him and ask him, so should this woman submit to her husband in all of these things that he is teaching that are incorrect, that are satanic? Should she submit herself to that? All right, then the word has to be saying something else, doesn't it? Now, I'm going to skip right past what Strong's has to say because I don't trust Strong's in this regard. I've shown you before in different studies how Strong's has, in some situations, their own agenda, like their own predisposition. So I'm not even going to go there. I'm going to read directly from how God uses this in a sentence. The Greek word is hypotasso. That's the derivative of that passage in which Paul says, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. The first thing we're going to do before we take a look at all those different contexts is we're going to look at all of the different translations. Well, not all of them. We're going to look at a few of them. In the Orthodox Jewish Bible, it says, Nashim, wives, make yourselves accountable to your Baalim, husbands, as to Adonenu. Then in other translations, some are talking about submitting, others are saying be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. Now let me ask you about your relationship with the Lord. If the Lord asked you to do something, by the way, like if he told you to do something kind of weird that didn't make sense to you, or how about, let's take it up a notch, guys. How about if he asked you to do something that was really hard? Oh, I can bet you'd be sitting there questioning him, wouldn't you? You'd be saying, you want me to give my money to someone who stole from me? I need to know that this is coming from you. Why don't you do that with your husbands then? When they're telling you to do stupid things like take your kids trick-or-treating and celebrate Christmas, wear an idol around your neck, that God's holy days have been fulfilled, therefore that means they've been abolished. What about those of you who follow your husbands all the way to hell? Would you be asking God about those things? Because I know I have, when he's told me give up your careers, and I was like, I need to make sure this message is from you. Because I'm not stupid. I'm not just going to go give up everything on some whim. You need to show me in your word that this is what you require and by your spirit, because in your law it says 2 witnesses, Lord. Am I being disobedient to my husband? Am I being disobedient to God? Am I not submitting to him because I'm asking him to be worth his salt and to obey his own law? Actually, I can tell you from personal experience that that is not testing the Lord. That is living in his law. That's saying, Lord, you've said that your law, in your law, that 2 or more witnesses are required. And you've taught me that 2 or more witnesses are required when I think that I'm hearing from you. And so I want to be certain that I'm hearing from you, and this is not my own voice, which darn sure is not, when I'm going to be giving everything up that I don't want to necessarily give up, and that this isn't coming from the devil. My point is, why would we not do that with our human husbands, guys? So what I see are a lot of quintessential pastors' wives pretending like they can just hide out in whatever it is that their husband is supposed to do. Well, he's my spiritual leader. No, let's get this straight. God is your spiritual leader. And you do submit yourself to your husband, but you need to use your own brain and your own mouth. If you think that what he's doing is wrong, what he's leading you to do is wrong, and the Lord is telling you this is not okay, or somebody else is confronting you and saying, why are you celebrating Christmas? Why are you believing in that pre-tribulation rapture nonsense? Let me show you in Thessalonians where Paul says that the day of the Lord is not coming until the abomination of desolation has been set. Do you even know the word? You are going to go through the Antichrist reign. Like, you're going to be persecuted and maybe even killed before that happens. So let me tell you what happens to me when I have done that with these wives. They say what they think is the kind response, right? Oh, yeah. That's a good thing to discern. Yeah, I'll contact you in a week and find out if you've done anything about that. And then they don't respond. How can you say you have the love of God in you when you are not willing to go to God and say, my husband's leading me in a way I'm not supposed to be led. I know that what he's saying is not true. I've done my own research. Now help me understand, what does this scripture mean? How do I submit myself to my husband and respect and obey him when he's telling me to do something, or he's leading our family in an incorrect, ungodly, anti-biblical, anti-Christ way? The leadership has to be godly, and you need to contribute. The people who are presenting this relationship with husbands in this particular way, where you don't have any role, are the very people who don't understand their covenant with Christ. Because this is a reciprocal covenant. It's not like Christ said, you're not a robot. He doesn't do like, here's the input, Carrie Ann, now you go do this and that, and you don't have any feelings about that, and you don't have to sort through it, you don't have to rend your heart, and you don't have to go to him and ask him, especially when the instruction is sounding a little wonky. They don't know their covenant because they don't have a relationship with God. Because like I said, if he asks me to do something and my heart isn't even, like, if I'm struggling with it even in my heart, I'm going to ask him for his witnesses, and I'm going to ask him also, his witnesses, to know that what I'm hearing is indeed coming from him. And I'm also going to ask him to change my heart, work with me to change my heart. I'm not a robot. And also, he doesn't want robot children. Like, he wants children who are actually turning their heart to what he desires and who he is. Isn't that something that you guys do in relationships? Like, don't you start to turn your heart to, like, couples start to like similar things, or at least appreciate similar things. I know this may not be the best example because I personally don't believe that sports are godly, but you may not be a sports fan, but you may have turned your heart in past relationships to figure out how to enjoy what your boyfriend or husband was into because you wanted to connect with them. And so maybe you figured out how to enjoy hosting or something like that, and maybe you didn't, but there are other things that you've done in order to draw close to the person you love. Well, you do the same with God. Like, if you love him, then you know that, first of all, God, everything that God tells you and everything he is right, and that's who you're striving to be like. So there should be infinitely more motivation to draw near to him and ask him, turn my heart towards the things that you love, Lord. Help me to become holy as you are holy, because that was one of the first things you mentioned in your covenant. All right, now that we've set the stage in common sense, now let's read how God used this in a sentence. Luke 2:51, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them, but his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. That's referring to Jesus when he was in the temple and they were looking for him for 3 days. He subjected himself to his parents. Like, he didn't fight going with them, he obeyed them. If your husband is leading you in righteousness, if he's leading you in truth, like, there's no reason for you to fight or be quarrelsome. Just subject yourself to what is right. But if it's wrong, don't. Paul is not telling you to subject yourself to wickedness. He's not telling you to follow someone all the way to hell. In fact, he has told both wives and husbands that you don't know, like, to stay with your spouse if you're married and when God calls you and you have an unbelieving spouse. And he has said this to both men and women. Remain with them if they're willing. You don't know if they're going to be saved through you. Oh my goodness. A man could be saved through a woman? Through her example? Who's ever heard of such a thing? Luke 10:17, and the 70 returned again with joy, saying, Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name. I'm just going through this to see if there's anything else that we might want to incorporate into our understanding, our repertoire of understanding what it means to subject, obey, submit to our husbands. Listen, as you are submitting to God, you don't need any reservation. The only thing that you need are checks and balances to make sure that you're hearing from him and that you're not misunderstanding. So you still interact with God and you ask him, like, have I heard you right? This is what I think I'm hearing. But you can 100% trust everything that you're hearing from him, but you still challenge the information. Like, you still go, okay, show me where this is in your word. Show me by your spirit. Teach me. Rend my heart to what you require. But Lord, what about this, this, and this? You want me to give to someone right now? Like, while I have no income and I just gave up my 3 careers, you'd like me to give to that person who stole from me and now is trying to slander me and sue me? Do you think I might have had some questions about that? Or do you think I was a robot and was like, okay, well, you said I'll just do it? No, I processed it with him. I sobbed. I brought myself to my knees. I did what I needed to do in my heart. And then I looked for the reason why this was so necessary and important right at that moment. And right at that moment, I was getting ready to launch the channel and publish the book. I was getting ready to serve him. And in another, month or 2, he was going to be activating me to be his witness. Yeah, it was kind of important, you think? But I took it up with him. It's not like I just went, okay, yes, sir, I'll do that right now. And I mean, I think personally, that kind of placid, unthinking obedience, like, I don't think that's what he's really asking for, because in the entire processing, in like me sitting there and trying to understand, why is this important to you? Is this in your word? Is this what you require? Are you really saying this to me? In all of that, I was built. How are you going to be built when you don't even think about what you're doing? When you don't even feel any of those feelings? When you don't take these things to God? Like, the entire Psalms show us the lament and the grief and the rending of the heart and the processing with God that the prophets and Jesus did. And I also want to remind you that when Paul was talking about wives not blurting out in church, that passage in scripture that the lying translators decided to translate to women, even though Paul just got done a few sentences up saying, what shall we say, brothers and sisters? And then subsequently says, oh, a woman shouldn't speak up in church. She shouldn't speak. It's disgraceful for a woman to speak in church. So go home and ask your husbands. Not every woman has a husband, guys. So he's talking to wives. And in the OJB version, it makes it very clear. It says, don't blurt out over your husbands. So that's what Paul was addressing. But in that passage of scripture, Paul tells the wives to go home. And if you got a question, go ask your husband at home. What he's saying is, don't start like asking him questions or questioning him in the assembly and causing disorder. It was contentious. It was chaotic. It was disorderly. So if you have a question, you're allowed to ask your husband. You're allowed to say to your husband, look, we've been doing this way. This is what you've been teaching us. And I don't think it's correct. This is what God's showing me. And guess what? The word says your husband should submit to you too. And then you come together and you pray about it and you find out what is correct and what is right. Romans 10:3, for they being ignorant of God's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God. Again, that's about rending your heart to what God knows is right. And a wife who is receiving godly instruction from her husband should not resist that. And a husband who is receiving godly instruction and whose wife is trying to restore him correctly, he should not resist his wife. All should be submitted to what is good. Romans 13:1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Okay, so if the powers that be are telling you to do something wrong, should you obey them? No, you should not obey them. You gotta use sense, guys. Take the entire word together, have a relationship with God, let Him minister these things to you. Now let's take the scripture that is most often cited incorrectly. 1 Corinthians 14:34. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. The law does not say that women are not allowed to speak. This is an utter misuse, total mistranslation of the word. I just demonstrated it for you. Paul goes on to say that they should ask of their husbands at home. This is specifically referring to wives. And Paul goes on to say that if you have a question, that wives, we are supposed to be obedient to our husbands. Husbands also to their wives. And so if a woman is blurting out over her husband or questioning him in the assembly, it is disobedient. Not because she doesn't have a brain or she's not entitled to her question, as Paul says, ask your husband at home, but because when you are doing that, when you are disrespecting your husband and creating that kind of dissension and disorder in the assembly, you are being disobedient and you are being disorderly and divisive. But go ahead and ask him at home. I don't really see here that there's anything new coming up. I think this really just boils down to an issue of common sense and having a relationship with God. That would be the one scripture that I think God would have wanted us to read and to discern, is that Paul is not saying be obedient to the extent that you don't have a voice and you don't have responsibility. He instructs the women to ask their husbands at home. He is addressing good order in worship. He's not promoting the oppression of women. Please discern this with God.